Thank you very much for your very kind introduction. My name is Chikako Tsuruta, and as has been introduced, I'm teaching at Tokyo University of Foreign Studies. And I'm a practicing conference interpreter and broadcast interpreter as well. And today, the topic I'm going to talk about is mainly on simultaneous interpreting and how I had done the broadcast interpreting for the State of the Union address by President Obama is going to be included in the talk as well. And before I begin, I just want to ask you, how many of you are interpreting students or interpreter? Actually, okay, let's see. Let's see your hand. Yes, okay. And the others, I suppose you're studying Japanese or students at this majoring in other than different languages. Okay, so all right. So the part about the State of the Union address is going to be English into Japanese, but I'm going to talk about broader issues concerning simultaneous interpreting. So I hope that everybody would enjoy what I do as simultaneous interpreting. I really enjoy what I do, and as has been introduced, I have more than 60 students who had graduated since I had started teaching at Tokyo University of Foreign Studies. And I'm very proud that I'm both teaching interpreting and also I'm practicing interpreter, that I mix those two careers. Yes. Okay, so I titled my talk, A Formula for Success in Simultaneous Interpreting. But before I begin this formula for success, if there's any such thing as formula for success or not, well, I'll tell you later, but I just want to go over, well, then who are interpreters actually? Well, what? Okay, yes. So can you give me, what do interpreters do? Yes. Who are interpreters? What kind of work do? Spanish, English. Yes. And court. Yes, I see. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. Okay, so you're court interpreter. Okay, so court interpreting is, of course, yes, consecutive interpreting. Yes. Mm-hmm. Do you practice often or?
Not that often.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes.
Okay, great. Okay, are there any other interpreters there? Okay, can you tell me what kind of job? Yeah.
I don't broadcast, but I do interpret for conference as well.
Yes.
And also legal, of course.
Okay,
and
so.
Also do over the telephone.
Mm-hmm.
So it's both simultaneous and consecutive.
Okay, fine, great. Okay, so you do court interpreting and you also do conference interpreting. Yes. Okay, so actually there are so many types of interpreters actually, and it can be court interpreting, or it can be conference interpreting, or like in my case, I also do broadcast interpreting. So there are different kinds of interpreting scenes. But if you take out the essence, so what do interpreters do? How would you say? For example, yes.
Let's say you basically just interpret, or you're like communicating, with what they have without taking any gist or anything. It's just as is. You give it. So you're like a vehicle from one side to another side. You're bringing them to understand what's being delivered.
Okay. All right. So you brought up the point that you're a vehicle and you act as
a communicator.
Great. A bridge. Okay. Yes. All right. So now I have a very commonly used a metaphor that is a bridge between the two cultures, or two speaker and the audience, two parties. So actually, interpreter is really what makes communication take place in a place, actually. So the fact is, in interpreting, the communication is immediate. It takes place on that place where the communication is supposed to happen. So that, I think, is really the essence of what sets communication specialist job interpreting away apart from translation. Translation, you have time to think, you have time to reflect, and you can try to choose words. And another thing is interpreting has to be done spontaneously and on the spot. You can't say, maybe you can ask a question to the speaker, maybe once in a conference or twice in the conference. If it's consecutive interpreting, you can say, oh, can I say that again? You know, but if it's simultaneous interpreting, you don't have that luxury. And you can't say, oh, playback, you know. So whatever you heard, whatever you can do on the spot, you just have to do your best. So in simultaneous interpreting especially, you're really, really working as the speaker is speaking, and we are really making the communication happen on the spot in the room. So we are, as interpreters, we are the vehicles of communication, as you said, and we are the bridge of the communication, but it has to be happening on the spot. Okay, so simultaneous interpreting is what I do usually. I sometimes do consecutive interpreting. For example, what was listed as what I did for American-Japan Society, that part, a little bit of that talk happened consecutively because before the speaker went to speak on the podium, then at the bit of the interview with the president of Japan America Society, that part was consecutive. So that did take place consecutively. But mostly it's nowadays it's simultaneous interpreting. In interest of time, especially, I think you know, since if there's mostly people who understand like in this case, if the audience is almost all people who understand English, and there's only a few, let's say the delegation on the Japanese side who are speaking in Japanese, then the most of the talk, if it's done simultaneously, then that's very the efficient way of keeping the communication going. And when I say who are the interpreters and what really makes interpreting possible, well, it's also true that with the advent of the technology now, simultaneous interpreting is the norm of this interpreting profession. But sometimes you don't have the communication equipment that's necessary to do it simultaneously. But I also would want to reflect in history. So who are the interpreters and what kind of jobs did they do? Because I'm very interested in history also. So I just give you two pioneers of interpreting, which I find very fascinating. Okay, so one is this gentleman. I also studied French in my college years, so I do understand French, but I suppose it's pronounced André Caminquer if you pronounce it in French way. And I looked up his history, but then it says 1887 question mark. So we don't know if that's for sure the year he was born. But the thing about him is that he's said to be the first broadcast interpreter. And another thing that is very interesting about him is his daughter is the famous French actress Simone Signoret. And there is a memoir that was written by Simone Signoret in which she says that her father one day came home very tired, and that was the day that he interpreted on radio. There was no TV those days. So he interpreted on radio the address by Hitler from German into French. And that was the night that he came back very tired, according to this memoir by his daughter, Simone Signoret. Okay, and Caminquer, it is said that he is a very well known for the two episodes that I read in the book that's called Interpreters as Diplomats, and that's a very interesting book. So if you're interested in history, you might want to get a hold of it. Okay, so let me just quote a part from that book that Simone Signoret said. Okay, so this is the part that was written by Signoret. Since new blood had to be brought in, it was fortunate that the UN was able to secure the services of the legendary André Caminquer, who trained most of the original simultaneous interpreters both there and later at the Council of Europe. So he was not just one of the first broadcast interpreters who went on the air, but he was one of the first ones that trained interpreters for Council of Europe and also at the United Nations. Okay, and so he is also known as the person who had given the interpreting for speech of Mr. Molotov at the UN. I think Mr. Molotov's name is well known in what's called Molotov cocktail nowadays. But so according to this book, this is a part about André Kamikel. André Kamikel, the subject of more stories than possibly any other interpreter of modern times, was once rendering into French a speech of Mr. Molotov at the United Nations. The hour was late. Everyone was eager to leave, but Mr. Molotov kept right on talking. When his turn came to interpret, Mr. Kamikel summed up the entire oration in these words. Monsieur Molotov dit non. It means Mr. Molotov says no. So I don't know whether that's really what us interpreters are entitled to do, but that was very appropriate to keep everybody happy at that time. So, I mean, he's one of those legendary figures in interpreting history. Okay. So, and another very interesting tale is this. So, and when a speaker once complained to Mr. Kamiker that is not exactly what I said, the interpreter replied, "No, sir, but it is what you ought to have said." That's another legend. So, like I was saying, our job as interpreter is to make communication possible in the room that the communication is taking place. So, if you stick to those concepts or definitions, he did exactly what was right. But I really find fascinating. I don't know whether I can be as brave as Monsieur Kamikel, but I really, yes, from those two episodes, I think he's really a legend. Okay. Another figure which I found in history, which is very fascinating, is Jean Elbert. And he's also French. And he is very famous for this interpreter's handbook that was published in 1952. And I don't know if you have seen this, but interpreter's handbook on the web, there's a Japanese translation of it. So you might want to take a look at it. But the Japanese translation of his work, Interpreter's Handbook, it actually is guidelines for being a conference interpreter. And what I find fascinating about it is it doesn't really look old even nowadays. So the principles of what's necessary in conference interpreter is already there. And according to this book, once again, Interpreters as Diplomats, Jean Elbert is quoted as like this. Upon the establishment of the United Nations in 1945, Elbert was invited to organize the Corps of Interpreters, which he directed for 3 years. So those two gentlemen were very instrumental in having the interpreters at UN receive the necessary training back in those days. Okay, so one thing that fascinates me is that even if you go back in history to the time that conference interpreting or simultaneous interpreting came into being, the principles are still the same, and we do find those giants of those days that really struggled with the profession and also tried to bring up many very good, talented conference interpreters to really make the communication possible during different languages, not just Japanese English, but of course in those days most European languages. But anyway, at the United Nations or at the Council of Europe, that's where the origins of simultaneous interpreting really were in place. Okay, and nowadays, Okay, so according to A.I.G., that's Association Internationale des Interprètes de Conférence, which was set up in 1953, and this just celebrated the 60 years of its establishment. And I'm an A.I.G. member, but unfortunately, there are not too many Japanese A.I.G. members because I think one of the reasons is that the Japanese market really does not require that we are A.I.G. interpreters. But in Europe, it's really very important that you are A.I.G. interpreter. And how to become an A.I.G. interpreter is that you need to have recommendations from your fellow A.I.G. members, and that you are well, kind of like it's kind of a mutual kind of almost a guild-like association. So we just make sure that we are good enough as interpreters to work in the booth together. So we are recommended by fellow interpreters to become a member of the A.I.G. But A.I.G. does a survey each year, and according to what A.I.G. has found out, most of our jobs are actually simultaneous interpreting, as is the case for me also. So most of the jobs that A.I.G. members do, there are over 3,000 members all over the world, but as I said, most in Europe, but we find that 96% of the time the interpreters' work are simultaneous actually. Okay, and as I was asking you, I also did find out that we have court interpreters in this room, and more we do also find that there are courtroom interpreting and also community interpreting and non-direct contact interpreting, such as remote interpreting or interpreting over the telephone or interpreting over well, I think we can do it over using the more digital technologies nowadays. Yes. Yeah, like conference call or video link. Yes. So we do have those niche markets, but we do find that most of the time it's simultaneous interpreting. Okay. And the next topic I'd like to have your attention to is what then are necessary to be good interpreters? Since we have two interpreters, maybe I might ask you, or for this anybody can answer, because you can be users of interpreters, or maybe you're just interested in communication. Well, okay, please, yes.
You have to know the two cultures you have, not only the languages, but you have to understand the cultures, the
Yes.
politics,
Mhm.
the geography, the history,
Mhm.
what goes on in the country. So it's not just a language requirement, it's a deep cultural
Understand. Yes, very good. Okay. Yes, to become yes, interpreter, you need to know good knowledge of cultures. Yes, and to have a deep understanding of the background knowledge of what happens in each of the countries that the language is spoken in. And, yes, etc. Okay. Yes, technical knowledge of the topic, of course. Yes. Really good listener. Yes. So you need to catch the information. Yes, by listening. So sometimes, yes. So as I would go into detail later on, sometimes you have the script before you, but yeah, you have to listen well at the spot. Okay. But in terms of delivery or communication skills, what do interpreters need to have? Okay. Pardon? Yes, memory is also important. Yes, and yes. Okay, so we we had you say yes. You have to have good background knowledge, and you have to have good memory. You have to have good listening skills, and yes, we do need a variety of factors to be an interpreter. Okay, so one thing that I always look up to have as my guide for what makes you a good interpreter is also falling back on A.I.G. If you go to A.I.G. homepage, there is a survey of what I did on 11 qualities of interpreters, and I just give you these 11 items. One is fluency of delivery. the other is logical cohesion. Correct terminology. Yes, like you said, you have to have good knowledge and correct background knowledge. So, so fluency of delivery, logical cohesion, correct terminology, and then the fourth thing is pleasant voice. I mean, you're listening to the interpreter, so you'll be happier listening to pleasant voice than not. Okay. Next is correct grammar. Correct grammar. And in case of simultaneous interpreting, synchronicity is also important. I mean, you don't want to be listening to or looking at the PowerPoint that is 2 or 3 frames after the speaker. Yeah, so synchronicity. And sense consistency with the original. Appropriate style, live intonation, and completeness, and native accent. Okay, so those were the items that Ike had taken the survey to both interpreters themselves and also to users of interpreters. All right. So what do you guess that the audience, or let's ask both. Okay, what do you think the interpreters themselves thought were the most important out of those items? I go over them once again. Fluency of delivery, logical cohesion, correct terminology, pleasant voice, correct grammar, synchronicity, sense consistency with original, appropriate style, live intonation, completeness, native accent. What would you think? All of them, yes. But if you have to choose, what do you think? Yes. Correct terminology. Okay. Yeah. And what would you think the audience had thought was the most important? Pleasant voice. Very good point, actually. Yeah, pleasant voice. Yeah. Okay. Pleasant voice. Yeah. Okay. So let's take a look. Now, according to the survey, all of what I'm telling you now is on the A.I.G website. So if you want to take a look at it once again, just put in, just Google AIIC in small letters, Association Internationale des Interprètes de Conférence. And you can have the A.I.G survey about this. And what was found was this, actually. So this sense consistency with the original was what was said by interpreters to be actually number one. That's the most important. More than half of the A.I.G interpreters, actually 70%, said that sense consistency with original is the most important. And as for the audience, fluency of delivery was actually the number one. So you're very close. Pleasant voice, fluency of delivery. In other words, that we don't stop in the middle, or we don't have the sentence hanging in the air, or we don't suddenly start speaking very quickly and suddenly slowing down, or suddenly with 2 big pause in between, or start sighing, or what have you. But anyway, okay. So and fluency of delivery, and then of course correct terminology and correct grammar is also very important. So more than 50% of A.I.G interpreters said fluency of delivery, correct terminology, correct grammar, also important, but sense consistency with original is the most sought after between the among the A.I.G interpreters. That was deemed as the most important. Okay, so this had me thinking, okay, of course, to become an interpreter, you need to study very well the material that you're going to interpret beforehand. So in any kind of interpreting, having good knowledge on the subject, like you said, is crucial. Otherwise, you cannot do any interpreting if you don't understand the material. If you don't understand what the speaker is getting at, how can you give a rendition of that in another language? Or how can you keep up with the speed of the speaker if you're in simultaneous speaking mode? Okay, so correct terminology, you really have to study, even if it's meaning that you have to memorize 300, 400 words in over a night. You have to do it. I mean, yeah, that's necessary to be an interpreter. Yeah. And of course, sense consistency with the original. Even though if you're very fluent in delivery, if you're not correct, if you're not saying what the speaker is saying, then there is no sense in having the interpreter giving a very fluent delivery, because that's not helping communication. It can lead to miscommunication, actually. It can lead to not having the speaker understood in the correct way, the way that the speaker intended to speak. Okay. Now, and then that had me thinking, okay, so what can I do in my capacity as teacher of interpreting to tell my students, for each area or each specific job, there are things that you have to do in order to prepare yourself. But generally speaking, in order to be a good communicator, what do you actually need to be able to do? And I came upon those two pillars. And this is actually what I do for my undergraduate students, especially. I emphasize the need for public speaking skills, because you are going to be the voice for the speaker, actually. And you're right, you need to have good listening skills, because you're the ears for the speaker as well. Yes, right. And another thing, you're right, you need to have background knowledge. And especially I emphasize for those who say they want to be broadcast interpreters like myself, you need to follow every day what's happening in the world. So I usually read 3 newspapers. I wake up usually very early in the morning, like 5 o'clock. Maybe if you're early birds, you're like me. And I also watch TV news, and I try to be current on the news topics of the day anywhere I am. So you have to be really following what's happening around the world. And sometimes it helps to be able to be reading the newspaper every day, because sometimes what happens is what you just read on the newspaper that day, the speaker might take up that day. It happened to me several times. So yeah, it really helps you on the job too, to be current on the job. But also you need to have as a background knowledge of what's happening in the international affairs. And public speaking skills. Okay, that part is what I am going to talk about next, because I found that in the recent ABC News that I interpreted, this was the topic of ABC News. I believe it was on January 16th, and there was this video clip about what was titled 3 Tips to Dimming the Lights on Stage Fright. And this actually dealt with what are necessary in order to overcome stage fright and be efficient public speaker. And it was kind of amusing to me, because I think I'm not the only one who really was very, very nervous going on stage. I was such a very nervous kid, really. So now I can speak on stage like this, and now I feel comfortable enough to be able to do it. But I was very, very nervous. I was very frightened, and I thought that I would never be able to be a public speaker. But well, somehow I taught myself to do it, and I think it's something that can be taught to those students who are aspiring interpreters. I think it is something that should be taught. And this ABC World News video was very, very interesting to me, because it just reminded me it's not something natural, even to native speakers of English, to have a naturally gifted talent in speaking in public. So this was quite interesting to me. And in this video clip, there was a part where it said that to be a good public speaker, what you need to do is you should need to be cool, calm, collected, and connected. Yeah, those were the words of the speaking coach who had helped Sarah Palin actually before her very famous speech at the Republican National Congress. And there are professional people who are teaching the art of public speaking, but also I think it's something that can be taught and also something that is quite important to be good interpreters actually, because like I said, fluency of delivery is what the audience, according to the psych survey, would like to have from the interpreters. And it really helps, I think, to train young students especially. So I try every way I can to make them try to be comfortable interpreting, and also for that I always try to have them lesson in public speaking, so that for the production part of the interpreting job that they can be comfortable, even if they can't listen correctly and even if they can understand the content of what the speaker is saying. If they cannot express it in effective way, that's not getting the job done. Because I always tell my students, it doesn't matter if you understood the talk or if you understood 100% or if you're clear on what the speaker is saying. That is not what counts. If you cannot convey it in an effective way and make the audience understand what is being dealt with by the speaker, then you're not getting anything done at all. Yeah, of course, you have to be able to listen and get what the speaker is saying. Then that's the starting point of beginning your interpreting work. But that is not enough. Even if you can listen to the speaker's talk 100%, and even if you can understand it 100%, the important thing is getting it delivered for the audience so the audience can understand 100%. What I usually say to students is that let's try to imagine somebody who is going to work in a foreign country. And if that person's foreign language skill is, let's say, 20% of what he can do in native language, let's say, then if he doesn't use an interpreter, if he or she doesn't use an interpreter, what he can do as, let's say, a businessman, well, the communication would be cut to just the limitations of his language abilities to whatever he can do in that foreign language. But if he can have a very good interpreter, maybe his or her communication ability can be even more than 100%, or the original, let's say 20% or so. I'm just citing this number, but of the foreign language skill can be enhanced maybe to more than 100% if the interpreter is also knowledgeable about the culture aspect, so that the interpreter knows how it can be conveyed in the most efficient way, in a most well-presented way, public speaking wise as well. So the impression that the business person can give is very much changed thanks to the interpreter, if interpreter has those skills. Okay, so let's go over once again what takes place in interpreting. Okay, yes, listening, of course, you have to be able to listen 100%. But next, what takes place in our minds as interpreters is we have to analyze. We have to analyze the information so that we understand what the speaker is trying to get at. So understanding. So we analyze the content based on the context and based on the audience, what is being said. Like the example of Monsieur Kamiker, the United Nations, if he can understand the audience well enough, it's now midnight, everybody's had a very long day, a tired day, and the essence that he needed to convey was Monsieur Molotov dit non. Well, that's an extreme case, but well, he did the correct analysis. So and he did a good expression in it, very brief and concise to the point, which is necessary. In any kind of efficient communication, you have to be concise and to the point. Okay, so that 3 steps in, I think, in interpreting what takes place in interpreter's job. But as I said, the last part, the delivery part, is what really is necessary to be taught, I think. So that's one aspect that I do take up consciously as my teacher, as my teaching job, that I try to teach the art of public speaking, how we can be efficient public speaker. Okay, now I want to give you a sample work of broadcast interpreting. Now, I think Yumiko Sensei might be able to help me on this, but I have distributed to you. So, okay, from here I am going to play a clip of actual simultaneous interpreting job that I did, but since it was something that was broadcast, I prefer that I don't have it videotaped, so please cut it off here. And now I switch from the PowerPoint to whoever has the 2 sheets that I had marked up. I would, if you have the sheets, I would want you to take a look at it. It's President Obama's State of the Union address. I'm sure you can get it from the website of the White House. So this in itself is nothing secret. And I'm sure that you can listen to Mr. Obama's speech on the website also. And I would think that you probably have listened to it when it took place. Okay, what I had marked up here are actually the 2 sheets out of the 9 sheets that was distributed on that day as I went to work. I had myself and my interpreting partner. We did Junkin, and yes, and I was second. Yeah, so my partner won. So she went first. Okay, and we had 9 pages. So what we did was she took the first sheet. This came in 10 minutes before actual broadcast. So yeah. So what we did was we divided. I gave her pages in odd numbers 1, 3, 5, 7. And I took the even numbers 2, 4, 6, 8, and we had the 9th page. So what we did was we cut this in half. So I took the latter part. Okay, so that's how we do it. So, and what we actually do is what's called sight translation. Actually, you can see how it's all marked up. So what we did was my partner was interpreting the first page, and while she was interpreting the first page, I prepared the second page, and when she was doing the 3rd page, I prepared the 4th page, in that order. But what goes in here is, I think you can probably read my very bad handwriting, but it's actually, if you know how sight translation works, it's going by segments, by chunks, and getting it, the rendition. But what I did here was, in ways of preparation, the 3 steps actually. So analysis, understanding, expression. So analysis, I marked the parts that I thought that I would need to think ahead, if I can, of the right term to express. So those parts I did write down what I intended to say on the spot. And sometimes what I did was I circled those terms that I felt was particularly important. And well, it varies from interpreter to interpreter, so there's no universal rule, but just to make yourself comfortable doing the job, so that you are able to keep the smooth delivery. That's what's important. So remember that the audience wants the interpreter to have a smooth rendition. So the part that was very important for the audience was fluency of delivery. So I made sure that there's nothing on the sheet, if I can prepare ahead, that would hinder me from giving a fluent delivery. And correct terminology, yes. So for the more technical words, it was not very technical, but for the terms that we have translation, set translation terms, those terms I of course wanted to give the correct terminology. So those terms I did write down to make sure that I do it right. And the two parts I would have you listen to is first on page 2, the part that starts with the point is. So if you have the sheet with you, please take a look at the part that says the point is. So here I just let you listen to from where it says the point is 言いたいことは I translate that as 言いたいことは into Japanese, and then I think this is I think one of the highlights of the speech, so I think you probably recognize. And what I kept in mind for this part is that I don't fall behind the speaker. So I'm very relieved when the applause comes because that gives me a break. But the important thing is that I get the timing right. So opportunities we are 機会こそが私たちの本質であります。So I just added some words is who we are. 私たちの本質 meaning that's the essence of Americans. Well, so I just wanted to make explicit what was implicit, I think, so the Japanese listeners can understand. Opportunity is who we are. Okay, and the defining project of our generation is to restore that promise, that part. Yes. Okay, and I think also if for those who can understand Japanese, I think I made it clear that I kept it short. I kept it very brief so that each part is exactly matching what President Obama is emphasizing. Each of those who's the CEO of America's largest automaker and the son of a barkeeper, Speaker of the House. I think that got a very big applause. And of course, that's talking about himself, how the son of a single mom can be president of the greatest nation on earth. Yeah, okay, so that part. So I hope I was able to illustrate how I try to do it, synchronize the rendition. Okay, and I give you another example. Yumiko Sensei, I'm sorry to have you do this for me. But okay, so this is the last part, which was very, very, I would say the highlight of this State of the Union. Okay, please. Hi. Okay, so let me wrap up. So in the effective training, as I was saying, I think it's necessary that you be a good speaker. So I always say for the public speaking skills, those are the tips that I always tell them. All right, so tell your story, actually. As an effective training, those are the two texts that I use. In other words, by Mono Baker, and よくわかる逐次通訳 is what I had authored myself together with two other professors. But in public speaking, what I always say is you should tell your story. So the interpreters also is like a speaker. So we should be able to say in our own words in order to give fluent delivery. I think that is very important that you not translate directly word by word. If you do that, you don't have fluency of delivery. So if you are thinking that you are the speaker, you can tell it. You should be able to tell it in your own words to make it a more lively delivery. That's one point. And the other thing is vary your voice. So if you just interpret word by word, if you're trying to stick more to the original script, then you tend to be so monotonous. If you don't put your thinking into it, you should vary your voice according to the mood of the speaker. If it's something that he is emphasizing, yes, we need to have a strong voice. But if it's something that's telling a sad story, maybe it's better to be more quiet. Or if it's something that needs to be emphasized, maybe it's necessary to have a pause or repeat or underline that message. Okay, vary your voice and stick to the message is the last point. So in interpreting, you have to not lose the speaker. So you need to know where the speaker is going. Okay, so I always tell myself, okay, before you start your talk or interpreting, have a moment's peace. Okay, no rush. And even in simultaneous interpreting, take notes so that you know the important points, you don't miss the important points. And the last but the most important message I wanted to bring across to you today is this. Always stand on your listener's side. Think of your listeners, think of your audience, and not what you're doing as an interpreter. You always, well, not, I shouldn't say always because maybe for you it's not that way, but you know, interpreting students tend to think, oh, I'm doing such a difficult job. You know, so just interpreting is so much tiring. But the audience doesn't care how tired you are, how stressful the profession is. Important thing is the audience can get the speaker's message with fluency of delivery. So, with that, I'd like to close. Thank you for listening.